This is an introduction to watercolor. First, raise your hand if you've ever used watercolor. All right, so I'm going to talk about a few things that you might not have ever known when using watercolor. The first thing on the board, you've seen that it says no shiny paint. Now, you might have been taught to get your brush wet, pick a color, and then start painting. Okay, that would be a no-no. That is something you do not want to do. And the reason for that is if you dip your brush into the water and then just start trying to get that color straight from the palette area, what happens is you're going to see that the paint is way too thick. Now, this is an example of paint that is way too thick. What happens is if you paint like this, the paint dries shiny. So you do not just want to dip your brush into the water and then straight to this area because it's way too dark and it's way too thick and it will dry shiny. So instead, you get your brush wet, okay, dip it into the color that you need, and then you're going to move the color over into the palette area. And then what you're going to do is you're going to add lots and lots of water. Watercolor is called that for a reason. It's mainly water with a little bit of color. So instead, it should look something like this. Okay, you can see that it's a lot more liquidy. It has a lot more water. Also notice the color difference. This is way light. This is what you want. Now, if you're asking yourself, well, I want a color that's this dark, this red, instead of just trying to get that straight from the beginning, what you need to do instead is get the really, really light color of red, let it dry, and then you're going to start to create layers of that color. When you let it dry and then you add a new layer, that's going to start to build up the color, and eventually you can get to this really, really dark color and it won't be shiny. So again, do not take the color straight from the color palette. You need to mix the color over into the next palette area and add lots and lots of water. All right, so those are our do's and don'ts, kind of beginning steps of using watercolor. Now, the first thing that you are going to be required to do for your project is what is called a wash. A wash is a solid, even layer of color. It can be any color you want. And again, if you want it to be darker, that's the color in the background, you need to build up layers. So have it be really, really light in the beginning. The lighter that the color is for the wash, the more even that it's going to be. So I'm going to get a bigger brush and I'm going to decide to use a different color. I'm going to use blue. Okay, so take that, mix the color around, and then you're going to move the color into the palette section here. This is where you're going to add lots of water. So we can add some more color, and then we're going to add lots and lots of water. Now, when you're doing the wash, that is what goes in the background part of your paper. So you have to have a lot of color mixed. If you don't mix enough color right in the beginning, if you're about halfway through and you have to mix more paint, what's going to happen, that's going to dry and it's going to create a line in your background, which you don't want. So you're going to want to fill up almost the whole palette with lots of color, but mainly water. Okay, so that should be good. It's plenty of color mixed. And then we're ready to start doing the wash. Now, the beginning part of doing the wash, it is required that you hold the paper at an angle. This helps the color to move down as you're painting. Now, for this practice, everyone's going to get a piece of paper. It's watercolor paper. We are not going to be taping it to a wood board like we will be doing for the final project. Instead, you're just going to hold it at an angle, and then you're going to do the wash in the background. Now, when we actually do the project, you are going to be painting the wash and going around the image that is in the background. For your practice, you're just going to do a solid, even wash to fill the whole piece of paper. So I'm going to move this just to this side. I'm gonna set my hand on the table, and then you can just slide the paper into your hand and even lower it a little bit more. You want it to be at a small angle. This is going to help, or it's going to create drips when you're painting. You do not want that. So just a slight angle. And then every time you mix or put your brush into the paint, you need to make sure that you're mixing the color around, or the water, because there are particles in the paint that kind of float to the bottom. And if you don't mix it around every time, you're going to get lighter and darker areas as you paint. So dip it into your watercolor, and then you're going to start at the top. We're painting horizontally. You're going to slowly go all the way across. And what you're going to notice is that there's kind of a puddle of color here at the bottom. That's because we're holding at an angle. Dip your brush back in. You're going to kind of go over some of that previous line that's there. And you're going to continue to move the color down. Notice that that puddle is there every time. If there's too much, you can just paint without dipping your brush back in. But I kind of like to, just because it keeps that puddle of paint going. Again, mix the color around. Okay, we're almost finished. Just one last line. So this is an example of a even, solid wash. This is what everyone is going to practice first. Once you've completed this, you need to let it dry. It doesn't take very long. Just set it to the side, let it fully dry. You're going to know when it's dry because the paper won't feel as cool. And you'll visually be able to see that there's not as much liquid. So let it fully dry. After that, I'll show you the next part of what you're going to practice. The next part, we are going to be using different texture elements. So you have your choice of rubbing alcohol, salt, plastic wrap, and paper towel. We'll be practicing those straight on top of the wash that we have.